let's get this day started. I am so excited to be here for another national conversation of the Nonprofit Show. We, of course, every episode like to give plenty of screen time and shout outs and love to our sponsors. So thanks so much to our presenting sponsors. You can see their logos on the screen right in front of you. I always like to say, go find them, give them a like, a follow, and just tell them thank you, because they really do believe in the work that all of us do across the sector at large. Thanks so much to you, Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I'm so glad that you've created this platform for these conversations in our sector. I'm Jarrett Ransom, the nonprofit nerd, your nonprofit nerd, CEO of the Raven Group, and just really love spending this time with all of you on these various episodes. Today's episode, we are going to talk really about like small shop, and Allison is going to tell us what small shop really is. And so Allison's with AQP Nonprofit Consulting. Welcome to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I guess small shop really means something different to everyone. I personally identify it as less than 3 years or under 500,000, or really just not with a robust development team. So it could be the executive director is doubling as the development director, or maybe they only have one additional development person that's helping with their development strategy. So a lot of it is really access to staff and revenue is how I define small shop.
Great.
And, you know, that's such a big concept to deal with, because pretty much everybody has to start there.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of small nonprofits really struggle with figuring out how to achieve sustainability. And so I see that a lot in my consulting of people want my fundraising help, but they don't have the funds to access the fundraising help. And so it's very much like cart before the horse, like, you know, do we invest the money in the beginning on the off chance that we'll get more money? And that's a really hard decision for nonprofits to make. And I think they also have a very specific like trajectory in mind of, okay, you know, as soon as we hit 50,000, then we hire a staff member, when that's not always, you know, the most efficient use of their money. Like hiring a full-time staff member, it could be better to hire a consultant. It could be better to, you know, invest in technology. But there's kind of this mentality of like, the first thing we need to do is either hire the founder or hire our executive director. And then they end up using so much of their, you know, available cash flow in the early days that they never are able to keep scaling, because every time they get money, they're like, okay, how do we like build out the infrastructure rather than being like more strategic about it, I guess.
Right.
So one of the things, you know, when I think about this, Allison, is like Julia said, everyone has to start there, right? Like everyone starts pretty much at that baseline of, we just filed our nonprofit with our EIN, you know, and really working towards that. But, you know, when you think about this, because this is something we talked about offline before we even opened up our digital doors, is many nonprofit leaders think, oh, I'll write a grant that's going to fund us, right? Like we will bring in all this money, it'll start raining from the sky, and it's going to come in the form of big foam checks, right? And so that's really the furthest from the truth. And when I think of our nonprofit landscape, we always say, is it, Julie, I think the number we always use is like 1.8 million. There are 1.8 million nonprofits in the US. So of those, don't mean to back you in a corner, Allison, how many of those might be small shops that we're talking about?
Oh gosh. I mean, I would say a huge percentage of them.
Right.
In Nashville alone, we have 1,800 nonprofits just in our like metropolitan area. And there are so many of them that are young or under the revenue cap, because like funders, in order to cap down on the number of people starting nonprofits, funders have said, okay, we're not funding anybody younger than 3 years. And then we're also wanting to see at least 200,000 or something in revenue. And so there's so many that are kind of like floating below that line. And they just kind of stay there because they can't get any access, and things like, even if we have a nonprofit membership association and things that are supposed to provide them resources, but small shops can't afford that. They can't afford a membership, they can't afford the classes. So they're just kind of riding that middle, like making just enough to like basically cover overhead, but never enough to like scale their mission. So I would say there's probably a huge percentage, just anecdotally, but
I would agree.
I agree with you. And I think that one of the things that's interesting is that I would imagine a lot of them don't know that that's where they are.
Right. They may not say I'm small shop.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think they'll be like, oh yeah, we're under, 500,000 budget, we're under 3 years or whatever, but they won't really understand, to Allison's point, what those implications are. Just on that trajectory of growth, if you want to follow Susan Kenny Stevens' life cycles of a nonprofit, those types of things. And I would imagine, Allison, that's kind of a dangerous place to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think also a lot of them don't recognize it if they've never seen a different nonprofit. Like, again, I always talked about nonprofits or small nonprofits as under 500,000. Well, then I, worked with a client that was making like 6 million, and they were like, oh, small nonprofits are anything under 3 million. And I was like, oh, like most of my clients would be happy to get there. That to me is like endowment level. And then you see nonprofits that have a much more coordinated strategy, like Red Cross or United Way, where they've got like a huge team of major gift developers, and they've got Salesforce, and it's just constant, solicitations that they've got going. And so I think a lot of small nonprofits are so, in their bubble, and they're just doing what it takes to get by, that they don't know, hey, this is kind of what like more mature nonprofits do to keep like the cycle going, and keep growing.
It's so funny you say that like, what is small shop, right? Because some organizations see it differently. When I have this conversation with my clients about what is a major gift for you, what level constitutes that major gift category, right? I literally have some clients that are like $500, right? Others are 1,000, some are 5,000, while others are 25,000. So that definition in and of itself is another one that changes depending on the perception and really the maturity of the organization.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I would say most of my clients consider 1,000 to be a major gift. Red Cross, they would be 25,000 or above.
Right.
Your gift.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that then. When you are small shop, what would you say are some of the costs and the benefits to having that structure, and maybe even more importantly, knowing that you're in that structure?
Yeah, I think benefits first, right? The smaller you are, the more like agile and mobile you can be. So when you do only have 1 or 2 people, it's much easier to coordinate what your strategy is going to be. You can be more personable when you're doing donor solicitations. I think the downside of having those larger coordinated strategies is, a lot of it is them just sending out cold donor letters and like hoping that they get money back in the door, which is great. They have brand recognition, they get the money, but it moves away from that relationship building aspect of fundraising that I think is honestly what creates a sustainable organization over the lifetime. But I think, so that's a real asset that they have, is they've got the relationships, they've got the personal aspect, and they've got like agility and mobility. There's less people you're having to pull to the table. Mm-hmm. Cost-wise, there's not a lot of budget, right? They may not be able to have a CRM. They may be having to track in an Excel spreadsheet, which is still good, but it's not going to have as much functionality as a larger shop may have. They may not have access to wealth screening or any prospect research to help identify. So it's going to be a lot of, boots on the ground. Who do I know? Who do the board members know? A lot of personal outreach. And then also may have limited access to buying advertising on social media or doing a direct mail campaign. I know I've provided for free to a lot of my clients some potential prospect lists from my wealth screening, but they're like, oh, that'd be great if I actually had the postage to be able to mail to these donors.
Sure.
So they have to make those decisions of what's going to be the best potential return on investment. And I think they reach analysis paralysis with that and say, oh, well, there's just so many things we could do, but we can't, really decide which one we're going to do. So we just don't do it.
And where do we start? And how important is that board and the board involvement? Would you see that that's really a benefit to these organizations?
Definitely. I mean, we're taught that, board is really supposed to be governance, but in the early years, they're much more of a working board, right? It's all hands on deck. It's who can you introduce us to? And we recognize that not most board members, there are going to be some board members that don't feel comfortable making asks, but really being able to, Noah Spiegel taught me this. He has a consulting practice in Nashville. He calls it the AAA. So it's ask, ambassador, or advocate. So asking the board members, which one of these three roles do you feel most comfortable talking? Do you like going out and speaking on behalf of the organization? Do you like being the person that opens doors, or do you like being the person that actually does the solicitations? So helping board members kind of figure out which three of those categories they fall into, I think is helpful. And really illustrating why it's so important, because founders take so much on themselves. Most of the time they're working a full-time job and also trying to run the nonprofit at the same time. And it's a grind.
Yeah.
And I think I just did a strategic planning session yesterday where she was like, I've just been doing everything. And the board's like, we would be happy to step up. Like, you just got to tell us what to do. And she was sitting there thinking, oh, well, I don't want to bother them. They're doing this as a favor to me. And so I think your board can be your biggest asset in kind of moving to that next stage if you're delegating appropriately, if they're all engaged, and if you're really spreading it, equitably.
And what I've noticed in my practice, Allison, and maybe you could agree or disagree, that's fine too. Julie and I like to disagree on this show. But, I find that a lot of the founders or co-founders, many do start this kind of as, in addition to their full-time job. Others, maybe don't, maybe it's a retirement kind of opportunity that they're looking to engage in, or they've reached that level of retirement, sorry. But then also, like, they're not usually equipped with the nonprofit savviness, leadership, business development that it takes in the nonprofit sector. So I see that misalignment, maybe I should call it, that the founders are running off of passion, right? But they're not running from a place of true knowledge of what it takes to really elevate and to get from starting year 1 to year 3, 4, 5, and even down the road.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, anyone can start a nonprofit, and that's a positive, but also can be a negative, because a lot of people don't take the time to look at, compliance wise, what can we do? I'm in a group on Facebook that have seen so many posts. When can I pay myself? It's like, no. Like, you can get paid, but it's a board decision, and, they have to do a compensation study. It's not a business. I mean, it is a business, but it's not a for-profit business where you can own it and, take owner's draws. And I think a lot of people actually don't know that. But I think it takes a lot of humility for founders to be able to say, I don't have that skill set, or I need to learn that skill set. That's one of the things that I think was the biggest asset, again, for that nonprofit I was doing the strategic planning for. She was like, I want a full-time executive director, and I recognize it's not going to be me. I'm creative director. I'm the person that's, really big on the mission. I can help with the programming, but as far as executive director, that's just not like my wheelhouse. And I think a lot of founders think that it has to be both, or they're worried about giving up a level of control. It's like, you can still be involved, but recognize that maybe executive director is not going to be the best decision for the nonprofit moving forward. And that's why you see a lot of those, financial decisions that don't make the most sense, because founders are also making decisions based on passion and based on how they want to see, the nonprofit move forward without like really saying, okay, this is strategically what we think the best move is for the nonprofit. And I think, I'm sure many of the audience have heard founder syndrome. That's one of the biggest challenges that nonprofits deal with, is like most of the time the founder is the person, standing in the way of like reaching that sustainability, because they're afraid of letting new voices onto the board. They're afraid of losing the, control they have over everyday decisions. They're afraid of getting replaced, or the board deciding that they want to hire an executive director that's different than them. And so that ends up being kind of just like this gridlock period, where everybody's kind of just afraid to make steps.
Yeah. And that definitely impacts that management style. It could almost really paralyze, like you said, the analysis paralysis piece.
Yeah. And even if they do hire an executive director, if the founder's still around, it can often be, undermining them. Like the executive director is like, well, the founder's on the board, so it doesn't matter what I say is best practices if the founder doesn't agree with it, or like executive directors are kind of tiptoeing, being the person like, well, do I challenge them on this and risk the board saying, hey, it's not working out, you're going, and then they're starting back from scratch. And so I think a lot of nonprofits kind of have that push pull of like, how do we keep the founder integrated in a way that makes sense for the success of the organization? But I think specifically for small shops, management style is usually very like team oriented, because, it's either team oriented with just executive director and board, or if there's just, 1 to 2 employees within the team. I think it's a lot of how do we divide and conquer? How do we decide what our strengths and weaknesses are and fill in those gaps, whether that's with paid staff members or with volunteers? How do we utilize our resources as efficiently as possible? And so I think the management style is really kind of figuring out I think a really important thing to me is I call it the compassionate care model. So the executive directors that I've had the best experience with when working in small shops took the time to say, like, how are you doing? What are your joys and challenges, both in your personal and your professional life? Because burnout is so high, particularly in small shops. And when you are hitting the pavement every day, building these relationships, having networking conversations, that can just be a lot. If you come back and then it's just like, hey, I would love to check in with you emotionally, but I'm the sky is on fire and I need you to do these other 500 things.
Yeah.
I think particularly in the time of the pandemic, sorry, my cat has made a feature.
I love it.
I know your cat might have something to say about this, right? Maybe she's checking in on you emotionally. Hey, how are you?
Emotional support cat. But especially in the time of the pandemic, we have to recognize that people are not going to be as productive sometimes as we want them to be, and being able to recognize that and say, like, how can I support you, really goes the long mile versus that like harsh, we got to get it done no matter what.
Your cat says you're fine now, so he or she is leaving.
I think that it's interesting. So much of what you're saying, I think the three of us, and probably so many people watching, the nonprofit show today, we've seen it, we're part of it, or we recognize it. But when you're in the middle of the storm, how do you have these, as Jarrett says, these courageous conversations? And how do you recognize that it's time to talk about this? Because it's really a hard thing, because it speaks to the level of passion and commitment that somebody has. And it's just brutal. I mean, it's just so hard. And yet I don't see how that small shop can move to the next level that they want to move to unless they have some of these conversations.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, little plug, but Crucial Conversations was like really important to me. It's a book. They have Crucial Conversations and Crucial Accountability. The author is totally escaping my mind right this second. But they talk about how to have hard conversations. And two of the biggest things are mutual respect and mutual safety, right? And I think the reason that a lot of these conversations do not go well is because somebody's respect feels threatened or their safety feels threatened, right?
Sure.
They see it as a personal attack rather than a strategic attack. Like, oh, you haven't been handling the nonprofit right, versus, hey, we recognize that like not everybody has a background in nonprofits. This is, best practice, how we should be approaching it. But I think especially if you're an outsider, if you're a consultant, if you're a new executive director after they've been used to the founder, that's going to come with like some pushback. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is like consensus building. So really getting to learn each of the board members, seeing what they feel, not coming in and saying, hey, this is just what I think we should do, but really saying, hey, how do you feel about this? What if I said that this was how we should do it? Do you feel like the board would be receptive to this? And that's where, strategic planning comes into place as well, is, if you give them an anonymous survey where they can really just say, here's how I feel about everything and bring it to the table. I think that helps eliminate some of that, because especially in those early boards, a lot of people on the board are related to the founder, maybe not like relatives, sometimes relatives, but, close friends. There's a personal relationship there, and that will lead to hesitancy to really speak up or challenge. So that's why executive director or consultants can sometimes feel kind of like an island, because they're like, I'm coming in and I know nobody's going to support me because they don't want to, rub
the boat or rough the feather. Yeah.
I was like, rub the feathers. And so I think being able to let them say it anonymously and say like, hey, here's just like what the board said consensus wise, like, how are we feeling about this, helps, because again, so many people feel like they're the only one that feels that way. And so they get afraid to speak up about it. And it also doesn't make the founder feel like blindsided or, people are against me, because they don't know who submitted what. They just know this is how, the board feels. And so I think that's important, like creating a space where mutual safety and mutual respect can be embraced, but also a way for people to express their thoughts in a safe way, so that we can come to consensus on like what we think the best decision is. Because I also think a big, hurdle is that the board tends to be kind of split on what they see the long-term, vision of the organization being. So often I've come in and it's like, we want to stay local and very niche. We want to be this international, superstar brand recognition. And like, there's just two different, visions of what we want the organization to be. And that tends to be, again, what leads to gridlock, because this half is going to say, well, that's way too unrealistic. And this half is going to say, oh, well, that's too small. You're thinking too small. We can do better. And a lot of it is just not having the action step or strategy to be able to say, hey, if this is the big place that we want to go, here's how we break it down into manageable bites and split it out and make it a reality.
Well, and to your point, managing those expectations and the results, again, going back to what you said, right, 30 minutes ago, we need to have that strategic plan to understand if we're all on the same page, because what that founder might have started out, and I think, Jarrett, you and I have talked about this and we've seen this a lot. You start out with one vision, you think you see what the community needs and what the situation is. And then as you grow, your community changes, the journey changes, the path changes. It's a tough thing.
Even your programs could change.
Yeah.
Julia, I love our viewers. I want to just make note that thank you so much to Pat, Patricia. According to the Urban Institute, we have these like sleuths that are out there saying, what is a small shop? What is the definition of a small shop? So thank you so much, Patricia. According to the Urban Institute, even after excluding organizations that have gross receipts below 50K, right? So filing threshold, small organizations compose the majority of our public charities in 16. So that's 2016. So you were right, Dr. Allison Plattsmier, right? You're like, I think it's a whole bunch. And so that's exactly what I would say too. So thank you, Pat. I really appreciate you digging into that for us. So thanks so much for that. And that was Urban Institute.
Urban Institute has great data that they collect. And so check them out. We use them actually quite a bit for a lot of our research. Yeah, absolutely. I want to really I'm amazed, Allison, at the things that you've shared with us today and given us a new perspective on how we need to be thinking about the organizations that we are, where we want to be, and the organizations that we're working with.
Yeah.
You know, because this is a big, big topic. And you made this comment, and I think it was so under the radar, but you know, in this country, it's very easy to start a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe personally that that's a good thing, but it comes with a whole series of other challenges. And so
Great comes great responsibility.
yeah,
Bingo. Yeah.
absolutely. It's just crazy. Well, I want to give everybody Dr. Allison Plattsmier's information once again up on the screen. Nonprofitfundraisingtoday.com, AQP Nonprofit Consulting. Allison, I've loved your perspective. I think it's been really refreshing to get this other view that is out there, but we're not talking about it, and we're not necessarily understanding it. And I think one of the things that I've taken away from this conversation is that it's not okay to think that you just got to wait it out.
Yeah.
You know, 3 years, if that's what you're waiting for, or you're waiting for a certain budget, that no worky. You gotta be strategic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're, yeah, I mean, again, grant writing is kind of sold as like this gold standard, but 70% of your income is going to be from individual donors. So it's never too early to start building those relationships and cultivating lifelong, you know, relationships with your donors, because those are going to be who weather the storm. I mean, even throughout the pandemic, giving has stayed consistent, with a lot of nonprofits saying like that their donors had said, I would have given if you had asked, but nonprofits were saying, oh, well, we can't possibly ask them in these times, but your donors will be the people that you know, come through for you. So, and I just wanted to make one last thing on the expectations and results. I think as long as, you know, dream big and then walk it back, right? Like in our strategic planning session yesterday, she said, here are all the staff members I wanted, said what she thought the salaries would be. And I said, okay, if you multiply that times what our overhead percentage usually is, then it would be 3.7 million. And she went, oh, and then her board member went, no, I think that that's doable. In 5 years, I think we can do that. Now we just need to walk it back and say, you know, how much would we need per year, considering that we have a certain level of retention, and then say, you know, how many solicitations is it going to take to get to that? How many sponsorships is it going to take to get to that? And just walk it back as finite as possible. And I think any goal is achievable as long as you have a plan and strategy for achieving it. So
I love it.
Great point. Thank you so much.
Yeah, those are wise words indeed. Hey, everybody, I'm Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I've been joined today by the nonprofit nerd herself, Jarrett Ransom, CEO of the Raven Group. And Allison, it's been fabulous to have you join us. We want to mention one thing that's really quick. One of my favorite quotes of all time is, you only know a good sailor in rough seas. And so if you or your organization needs a little bit of extra help, it's confidential, that's filled with realism and maybe just a touch of tough love, reach out to us, either Jarrett or myself. This is something that we're offering just through the nonprofit show. If you came to us through the other direction, the prices are much higher, but we've made a commitment for doing this for a little bit of time. So either myself or Jarrett, we're both very different. We have different approaches and different strategies. Anyway, hey, presenting sponsors, without you, we would not be here having this amazing conversation as we do. Jarrett, what's our show number today? Do you know?
Oh, of course you asked me on a day I didn't look. I want to say it's like in the 220s.
I think so too. Yeah, 200.
I know. Wow. And Allison, you've been wonderful. I can tell you're such a brilliant mind, and I know we could nerd out on this conversation ad nauseum, or not even ad nauseum, because this stuff doesn't do that to me. I just love it.
Yeah. It's been great. It's been a really good conversation, something that we need to really be mindful of and thinking about. And as we end every show, we want to remind all of our viewers, and certainly those in our community working so diligently.
Yeah.
Stay well so you can do well. We'll see you back here tomorrow, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.